Howdy my totally tubular gamers, we're back with another ranking video, and today is another Capcom classic. We're going to be ranking the Viewtiful Joe series. Now if you don't know the Viewtiful Joe series, it is a series of side-scrolling beat-em-up games created by legendary game designer Hideki Kamiya. It was primarily developed and published by Capcom and its subsidiary Clover Studios before they closed. These games are known for their excellent action, superb presentation, and just a real sense of style. These games have so much charm, they look awesome, and a lot of them play awesome as well. Now, while Viewtiful Joe wasn't the biggest commercial success, it did receive universal acclaim and has since become a fan favorite amongst Capcom's series and really is a cult classic at this point. People just loved the original Viewtiful Joe for its gameplay, its presentation, and everything I just mentioned a few seconds ago. There really just wasn't anything on the market like this at the time. It was so original, it was so fluid, and it was just a great time. People really wanted more, and they got more. There would be a couple more Viewtiful Joe games released over the years, but Viewtiful Joe has since floundered out and become basically irrelevant in today's gaming landscape. There actually hasn't been a Viewtiful Joe game in 17 years as of this video. When it comes to series people would love Capcom to bring back, I'm sure Viewtiful Joe is near the top of the list, with Dino Crisis, of course. Aside from a few cameos in some Capcom fighting games, Viewtiful Joe really just has completely disappeared, and I think that at the very least his games should get re-released on modern platforms. Like, why haven't they? I mean, Viewtiful Joe even got an anime, but that's a story for a different day. Today we're just going to be ranking the 4 main games that have been released for Viewtiful Joe. And while I think all 4 are good games, some are better than others, and we're going to be looking at pretty much just everything here. And you know, if you have any fond memories of Viewtiful Joe, you can let me know down below. Like, share, sub, all that good stuff. Let's just get right into it. What is the weakest game in Joe's arsenal? When it comes to the weakest game in the series, I think it is Viewtiful Joe Double Trouble, released for the DS back in 2005, and this would actually be the last Viewtiful Joe game released, period. Now, out of all the Viewtiful Joe games, this is probably the most forgotten, and with good reason. While I think it is still alright, yeah, it's definitely the weakest. Unlike the other games in the series, Double Trouble actually takes place primarily in the game's depiction of the real world, instead of the fictional world that the other games have. The game takes place in Movie Land, an action film styled theme park. It sees Captain Blue, one of Joe's heroes, trying to make a movie. However, as he's making the movie, some stuff goes down and basically some henchmen show up and steal the movie. It's then up to Joe to go and try to get the movie back. Then somehow Joe can use his movie power to turn into Viewtiful Joe in real life and go and stop the bad guys. There's a little bit more to this plot than that, but that's the general gist of it. The plot is fine, and when it comes to the game's personality and the characters, it is pretty in line with Viewtiful Joe. It's kind of what you would expect. It does feel a little by the numbers for this series, especially by this point, but it was fine enough. And when it comes to the presentation, I mean, it looks as close to the actual Viewtiful Joe as we could probably get on the DS. I mean, it looks fine, the frame rate is decent enough, but obviously it's not going to look as good as the console games. And the general gameplay is watered down Viewtiful Joe. I mean, obviously some things were going to have to be compromised since it is the DS, but the general gameplay is pretty representative of Viewtiful Joe. You go around in a 2D perspective with 3D graphics, beating the crap out of basically everything. You have your VFX powers, however, the only one that's really used for combat here is the slow-mo. But the combat is still Viewtiful Joe. It does feel quite a bit easier and simpler than past titles, but that's because there's less interesting enemies, there's less enemies in general thanks to the limitations, and the combat can feel a little stiff at times. The combat is fine, I'd say it's pretty average for the most part, but then we have the other VFX powers which are used for puzzles and use the touchscreen. So yeah, this game does have a fair amount of puzzles and you do use other VFX powers for them, and using the touchscreen, you already know I'm probably not going to like it, and no, I don't. It's my least favorite part of the game. I wasn't big on these puzzles, I wasn't big on the touchscreen or the powers, really anything like that. And I get, you know, it's the DS, they gotta use the gimmick, they gotta implement the gimmick. It was 2005, the DS was pretty much brand new at this point, and it was like, hey look, a brand new Viewtiful Joe game, which was actually relevant at the time, with these touch controls, that's cool and all, but I'm not a big fan coming back all these years later. I was like, I don't really like this all that much. And I'd say as a whole this game is pretty middling to average, maybe slightly above average. It's pretty okay I guess for a DS game, but I wouldn't recommend anybody tries this, and I don't think it's a very good representation of the series. So our next game here is Viewtiful Joe Red Hot Rumble, released in 2005. It is the only spin-off in the Viewtiful Joe series, and it's actually a Super Smash Bros. Style fighting game. It's kind of funny how people are going a little nuts these days for Smash clones with the Nickelodeon fighting game and the multiverses coming out soon enough, but back when this game came out, people were like, why would I want to play a Melee clone, as they called it? I would rather just play Melee, and you know, yeah, this game doesn't hold a candle to any Smash Bros. Game, but it is a fun little fighting game. I'm not going to say it has all that much depth or anywhere near as depth as even a Smash Brothers game, but it is a fun little button masher. I mean, it can be a good time, especially in short bursts, but you won't be playing this game for all that long. The game does have a story. It is actually based on the anime series and sees Captain Blue working on his latest film, and in order to determine who will get the lead role, he holds a battle tournament between all of the people auditioning, which is all the Viewtiful Joe characters. You can play as any of the Viewtiful Joe characters, and I gotta say, it is kind of cool how all of the characters from the first two games really are here. Unfortunately, they all feel very similar, and this game really just feels like a button masher. It is incredibly shallow for a fighting game. Now, I'm no fighting game expert. I'm a pretty casual guy myself, but like, it is as deep as a puddle when it comes to like the actual combat mechanics of this game. Like, there's a reason it never got picked up by really anybody. It's just too basic for its own good, and sure, there is some fun parts to it, and it is fun to have a mindless little fighting game like this, but it doesn't even have the depth that the actual Viewtiful Joe games have. I can say at least the presentation is there. The game looks great, it looks like a Viewtiful Joe game, it has the same personality and charm and character that the other games have. It is definitely good in that aspect, but when it comes to the actual gameplay, I would say again, it is pretty average. But yeah, you know, there's like a fun little story mode, and there's even multiplayer, because of course there's going to be multiplayer in a game like this, but I've actually never gotten anybody to play this game with me. I've had this game for over 10 years on the GameCube, and I've just never gotten anybody to play with me. I've gotten more people to play Shrek Super Slam than this game, so maybe that's telling. A fine enough game, but I still wouldn't really recommend it, and certainly one of Capcom's weaker fighting games. And in the number 2 spot, we have Viewtiful Joe 2, released in 2004. This game was not actually directed by Hideki Kamiya, and he's gone on to criticize it because he didn't direct it and he didn't like some of the choices. But I still think Viewtiful Joe 2 is a pretty good game. The game takes place right after the first game. Joe has just saved Movieland and his girlfriend Sylvia, who now joins him in battle. But they get a message from Captain Blue that a new alien force has shown up known as, yes really, the Ghetto Empire. They're actually just straight known as the Ghetto, but yeah, they're attacking Earth, and it's up to Joe and Sylvia to stop them. When it comes to the story, I think it is alright. It's not as good as the first games, but it still does have a lot of charm. It is still funny, and it does have its quirks. Now, while I do like Sylvie, and I think she does have her own moments that are actually pretty good, I feel like it kind of does neuter Joe's character a little bit. He's not as funny, confident, or awesome as he was in the first game, and I feel like a lot of his jokes and just everything he says is he's just kind of complaining about Sylvia, which is kind of funny, but it does get old. It's not enough to like ruin the charm or the story of the game or anything, it's just something I did notice. Now, when it comes to the gameplay, it plays incredibly similar to the first Viewtiful Joe. Like, it is very similar in just about every aspect. Like, all of the VFX powers return from the first game, and the combat feels honestly like just as good as it did in the first game. You still do a bunch of punches, you zoom in with slow-mo, you can speed things up, you can do taunts, there's a lot of dodging in this game, but something new is that you aren't only playing as Joe. Yeah, you actually get to play as Sylvia as well. She uses her guns as opposed to Joe's fists, and while I don't like it anywhere near as much as Joe, and I'd much rather play as Joe, she is a nice addition. The gun is actually pretty useful, especially for some of the bosses and other enemies that you encounter. She does have a different playstyle, so at least she's not just trying to copy Joe. And when you aren't beating the crap out of everything, you are exploring the areas. There is a little bit of platforming you can do around here. There are some puzzles that make use of the VFX powers, especially Sylvia's. And the 6 machine returns for some interesting vehicle levels. These levels are also pretty fun. Again, not as good as the first games, but I think they're still pretty good. And like the first game, you can upgrade Joe and now Sylvia and give them new abilities, stat bonuses, etc. So that's all well and good. I think this game is pretty solid. It is a pretty fun beat 'em up, and I do like a lot of the levels. I just don't think it's as good as the first game. It just falls short by only a little bit, and it still is a really solid time. And if you like the first Viewtiful Joe, I can recommend this. You will like it. I just don't think it's as good as the first game. And since we're comparing the two clearly now, I think the challenge in 2 is not as good as the first game. I think the levels are still pretty good, but not as good. I don't think Sylvia adds as much as she probably should to the table, and I wasn't a big fan of these bosses at all. But despite all of this, again, the game is still quite good. It is still very fun. It is still a good time. If you like beat 'em ups or the first game, you're going to quite like this. And there's really still nothing else on the market, especially nowadays, that's anything like this aside from the first game. And you know, speaking of the first game, here we have in the #1 spot the original Viewtiful Joe. I think the original Viewtiful Joe is not only the best in the series, but is the high point, and I just don't think that the games ever got better than this first game. It is one of the very best beat 'em ups that I've ever played. It's one of my favorite beat 'em ups, and I can say that it is a Capcom masterpiece. The story is actually pretty wild. It sees Joe and his girlfriend just going to the movie theaters. They want to go see a movie about Joe's favorite hero, Captain Blue. In the middle of the movie, it seems that Blue is defeated by the antagonist, and the antagonist just reaches out of the screen and grabs Sylvia, and Joe as well eventually gets thrown in there, and he goes into this place called Movie Land where it's fictional. After Joe gets pulled into Movie Land, he is greeted by Captain Blue, who entrusts him with the V-Watch, which allows Joe to turn into a superhero with one of the best sayings in any video game ever.
Head to the go-go, baby!
And after becoming a superhero, it's up to him to go save his girlfriend and Movie Land, I guess. The story is pretty wild. I really love the game's atmosphere, the aesthetic, the characters, the charm. Like, this game is just brimming with personality. It is so much to it. It's original. It's funny. It's got really good writing. It's just great in like every aspect when it comes to the story. Joe's great, the antagonists are even better, like, it's all really well done. I really do like the world and the setting of Viewtiful Joe, and when it comes to the gameplay, oh, it is unmatched. It is one of the very best beat 'em ups you'll ever play. For the most part, it's a left to right 2D beat 'em up with 3D graphics where you do a lot of punching, you do some dodging, and then you get your VFX power. See, Joe can do a bunch of different powers that have to do with movies, like he can slow everything down to make his punches way stronger. He can speed things up to whoop some ass. He can zoom in to do some crazy kicks. Like, it is some really cool stuff. The game is really good at teaching you on the fly how to punch, kick, dodge, and how to use Joe's powers. And you know, it's one of those easy to understand and use, but really difficult to master and get good at. Like, this is a really solid, difficult action game that is incredibly rewarding. This game is not meant for kids. It will kick your ass. It is no problem being challenging, and it is no problem just destroying you towards the end of the game. As a kid, I had a lot of trouble with this game at the end, but nowadays I'm able to really appreciate it and see that, yeah, the game does make you master it. Along the way, there are 6 machine levels as well, where you're not just punching stuff, but you're actually in a vehicle shooting stuff. These are really fun. These are some highlights of the game, actually, and are not shoehorned in. All of the levels are actually really well done. I can genuinely say that every level is good. They're also incredibly varied. They look different. They add different gameplay mechanics, like when you're underwater. And it helps add to the enemy variety, which there isn't a ton of, but at least the bosses are all really well done, and they're actually incredibly fun as well. Additionally, there is a little exploration in here if you want to get the collectibles, and there are the occasional puzzles that make you think about Joe's powers and how you want to use them. These are a nice change of pace. I'm not like in love with them. I don't really think they're all that great, but again, it is a nice change of pace. And something that this game has, in my opinion, way better than the other games is replayability. The game isn't all that long. It's probably 5 to 10 hours long, depending how good you are. But it is incredibly replayable thanks to the multiple characters, especially on the PS2 version, the new difficulty modes, and just how the game can actually mix it up a lot, like not telling you where the enemies are going to attack and just giving you new enemies to fight altogether. It's really awesome how much replayability there is. I've come back to this game many times over the years to play it because it's just a really great action game. It's one of the best action games Kamiya has made, which is really saying something. And you know, the game has a stellar presentation. It just looks amazing. It has a really awesome, unique look to it that is just great even nowadays. It's aged great. The music, oh, the music is really good. It really slaps. Superb music. Like, this game is just great. I have nothing but praise for this game, and it desperately needs a re-release. It really desperately needs a re-release. Most people probably don't even know who the hell Viewtiful Joe is, and I think a re-release would really help that because this is one of the finest action games from the 2000s. Capcom was really on a roll in the 2000s. They were really on their A game. They had Dead Rising, they had Viewtiful Joe, they had Devil May Cry, they had Resident Evil 4, and you know, all of these are great. And Viewtiful Joe is one of the best. It really is. What an excellent game. So that's it for this video. Hope you guys enjoy. One day I hope Viewtiful Joe comes back, and I hope that this list is outdated, but I'm not holding my breath. Anyway, have a good one, guys. See ya.